Okay, I think we're going to jump right in. It's been a fantastic day. Thanks everyone for being here. We're going to introduce this final panel of the day, moving from the suburban area and moving to unlock housing. And some of you may have heard earlier, I'm Traci Gere. I represent House District 134 in the Maine House. That's Kennebunkport and Coastal Biddeford and Kennebunk, what I like to call the coast with the most. I've had the honor to co-chair the Joint Select Committee on Housing in this legislature, which was really created when the leadership recognized that we needed to really focus on Maine's housing crisis directly and focus a policy committee on solving the problem. Some of you may have also been involved in some of our committee meetings and might have heard me give my pickle speech. And when you think about how we've gotten into the housing crisis that we face here in Maine, it has really been the accumulation of decades and decades of policy decisions. And some of those are intentional, some of those were accumulated over years and years, and then all of the different ways that municipalities around the state have addressed their own housing needs, or not, as the case might be, to the point where we have what I call, we're in a pickle, because we've got so many issues that need to change and need to be addressed to really get at and tackle the housing problem. We're fortunate in that we have many people working, and we share this task, certainly with our compatriots across New England who are facing some of the same challenges looking forward. So this panel was brought together to bring folks from New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine to talk about some of the things that they're doing to address a systemic change in their state. So we're gonna do some introductions here. And I asked everyone to give a brief introduction of themselves with a 1-minute story of a great housing success. Something that will conclude on a happy note today, something that was a great and happy success in their state in the last year. So we'll start out. First, we have joining us Jake Hemmerick, who is the Community Planning and Policy Manager at the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development in the Division of Community Planning and Revitalization. A team that uses a place-based approach to land use planning and community development to empower state and local leaders to plan for and build vibrant, inclusive, and resilient downtowns, villages, and neighborhoods. So I'll hand it off to Jake to introduce himself and tell us a happy story.
Thank you for that, Representative Gere. So I live in Barre City, Vermont, and it was one of the cities that was really hard hit by the July's flooding. And we had 26 landslides in a 5-mile area. 5 of those sites included homes that were deemed uninhabitable. And those people were unable to sell their homes, and they were really unsure about what's the future of their life gonna be based on buyouts. So they were in a cliffhanger situation with a lot of uncertainty. The happy moment came because I'm an outgoing mayor as a part-time role and a glutton for punishment. But that came when council committed to buying those 5 sites and giving certainty to those people, and at the same time, giving $250,000 in ARPA funding to seed a new housing revolving loan fund. And I think in the grand scheme of things, not that much money, but I love this neon sign behind us because it says hopeful. Because I think it was just one of those things that gave people hope, and as policy nerds, as a lot of people are in this room, is to figure out how we can make it easy for people to do the right thing and to give people hope that the good thing is possible made my year. So, yeah.
That's a great story. Thanks so much. Next, we have George Reagan. And George is the Director of Community Engagement at New Hampshire Housing. And in that role, he helps communities and organizations show the connection between an adequate and balanced supply of housing and economic growth and stability. And George, I'll hand the mic off to you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here to close out your session. So in my title, Community Engagement Director, my story is sort of a amalgamation of a bunch of stories that we've been noticing over the past year and years, and that's really community engagement being done in communities all across New Hampshire. And if you're old enough and enjoy the band 10cc, one of their classic tunes says, one of the lines is, communication is the problem to the answer. And really, it's kind of profound in its own way. And so I've been working with, through ARPA funds that went to a $100 million Invest NH grant program, of which $5 million went to our Housing and Opportunity Planning and Zoning grant program. And part of that was a great partnership with the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. And we've been working with them, and with my colleague Sarah Reitzman, we put together a publication called How Do We Talk About Housing? And often how we talk about it can lead to divisiveness and exclusion when really we're trying to invite people into conversation. So what I'm really excited about is we've had 3 classes which we created a housing academy through our UNH Cooperative Extension, and it's really helped community citizens on the ground that are trying to battle housing issues in their community, along with this funding that helps get professional consultants. I will shout out, Ivy Van is here, one of our esteemed consultants, and so she's working with communities, but the communities are helping to talk with one another about housing. And we're seeing some small incremental successes. I think of Chuck Marone, humbly observed where people are struggling, what's the next thing you can do, and do that thing, and the communities are doing that through their land use regulations.
Thanks, George. That's more successes. That's fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Sarah Curran, we heard from a little bit before, and she's returned to join us for this panel. She is the Deputy Director of Climate Planning and Community Partnerships with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, which we all affectionately call GOPIF. In this role, she leads climate policy planning and climate-related programs to support Maine communities. She has extensive experience with nonprofit organizations, including being a program director at the Maine Development Foundation for the Forest Opportunity Roadmap. And Sarah, your turn.
Thanks, Traci. So I think the story that I wanted to highlight, a lot of my work is in policy these days. I work in GOPIF. We are very focused on climate policy, on housing policy. But as you all know, a lot of the heavy lifting happens at the local level. So the innovation I'm going to talk about today is the new Maine Office of Community Affairs. And I think that the governor and the legislature passing the establishment of this new office in the supplemental budget this past spring is really an exciting kind of turning moment for the way we provide technical assistance and support to communities when they're planning for the really tough challenges that we're all working on together. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And we're going to dive into the specific content that each person's going to talk a little bit about, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. I think we'll start off with George, and George is going to tell us about their work in New Hampshire on programs that provide a state-level path to project approvals, and which is a challenge I know many folks have faced, especially if you've tried developing a project and having gone through various phases, sometimes they don't get approved, and you've got to really think about that, especially when it comes to providing affordable and attainable housing for folks. So look forward to George's lessons for us.
Sure, thank you. And again, I also want to say, certainly on the state level, I just mentioned the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program. We have an additional allocation of money that's going to, again, be available to communities. And so that's state level in terms of funding, but I do want to, for those of us that don't know, New Hampshire, while it's not a home rule state, really values its local control. And so that money to, again, help with consultants through 3 phases of sort of 3 areas, which is one, which is master plan development. The other is looking at how do you look at your own town's barriers to housing development? So what are those land use regulations and processes that get in the way? And then money for regulatory reform. And I just want to highlight that there's been so many communities that, again, have done incremental things like reducing parking minimums, allowing detached accessory dwelling units, which is a big deal in New Hampshire. At the state level, really trying to put through some state legislation around that, but we had some successes and some challenges this year, so that struggle continues. But to speak specifically for a couple of minutes on something that I'm asked to talk about is the Housing Appeals Board. And so one of the challenges, as we all know, whether we're a small-scale developer, a private homeowner, or a large developer, is just navigating that process, and where, especially when we deal with variances and the like. And so often, as we know, that process, that legal process, can go on for a long time, even into years. And so a couple of years ago, the legislature enacted the Housing Appeals Board. And the Housing Appeals Board is really an alternative to our Superior Court, where you would go to appeal a zoning board decision or the like. And so what's really good about that is it's an expedited appeals process. You can represent yourself, so pro se representation. And the speed at which it goes is a lot faster, so the max is supposed to be about 150 days to get a decision. The Housing Appeals Board is, by statute, has to have an attorney and a licensed land use surveyor, and then 3 members total, and the other can be chosen that has learned experience in land use policy and planning. And so there's a 3-person board that's making those decisions, and of course, there was a lot of challenges to that because you feel like if you've got a housing appeals board that maybe they'll be favorable to every developer trying to do any kind of housing. And really, as these cases have played out, they've been pretty fair and balanced in terms of either siding on the side of the municipality for whatever reason or with the developer. Additionally, recently, the state legislature enacted a land use docket, and that is it's similar to Housing Appeals Board, but it is also going to hear appeals, but it's made up of a judge as opposed to 3 civilian folks with expertise in land use. So there are those 2 choices. That one might be a little bit longer in terms of the overall turnaround, which is 180 days, but both are really seen as really an expedited way to deal with these issues related to housing development and really kind of clear the way for those cases that might be frivolous, get to the answers, and move forward. We all understand that for developers, time is money. Having a process that's predictable and consistent is hugely important. We've got a state workforce housing law that was enacted back in 2008 that without something like this doesn't have a lot of teeth to try to help production move. And even with the dearth of housing and the demand we all face, we still deal with those impediments along the way. And this is a way to sort of expedite that and get to a good resolution that in a lot of cases results in the ability for more housing to be developed.
If I could just ask a quick clarifying question, I'm curious as to the criteria that the board uses when a developer is bringing an appeal of a decision.
Yeah, that's a good question. So really, they're going with what's in the written record. So whatever goes through planning board or goes through zoning board, they're looking at the written record and looking at the procedures and process that have gone along with that. So they're not necessarily entering any new information in, but they're adjudicating whether the developer is saying I want to attest that variance or a procedural issue. So that's what they're looking at.
Great, thank you. And we will have time for Q&A. I will move on to Jake and ask specifically, he was going to speak to us about the small scale building types program in Vermont.
Thank you. I was in Bellows Falls yesterday for our annual downtown conference that Vermont puts on, and we often pick a community that's seeing some revitalization success, and people come in from out of town, probably not unlike this event, and say, gosh, this is just such an overnight success. And the community leaders that generally are partners in hosting it say, yeah, it's an overnight success that was 20 years in the making. So I love this pickle story. And I did want to talk, building up to that design guide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the journey that Vermont's been on, because we've had several projects, and I'll give you snapshots that take us to how we got to this small-scale developers guide. When I first started with the department 6 years ago, I did a lot of bylaw and plan reviews for a designation program we called Neighborhood Development Areas. And it's a program all about designed to extend regulatory and non-regulatory benefits to municipalities and developers to make housing more affordable in smart places. And when I was doing those reviews, we were just noticing the municipal bylaws were in bad shape to welcome new infill development based on the state standards that we had put in place. And so we went to the legislature and said, we really need to make this easier for our municipalities. So we put together, with the Congress for New Urbanism and funding from the legislature, a zoning for great neighborhoods guide. It's called Enabling Better Places all of these things I mentioned are available on the website, was based on model place types, rooted in Vermont's pattern. And then we went back to the legislature next year and we said, now we need a grant program to roll this out. And the legislature agreed. They've re-upped it 3 years. We've moved $1 million into 31 municipalities, which is 1/3 of all municipalities with planning and zoning in the state of Vermont that are working to welcome new homes and neighbors in smart places. And so we had rolled out this grant program and got to the point where we're still noticing a gap for missing middle homes. We were seeing a lot of large lot, single-family home development throughout the state, and 40-unit buildings, mostly led by our affordable housing communities. In some cases, we were even seeing an attrition of missing middle home types, like duplexes and triplexes. And so there were 2 programs that Vermont tackled that got at that a little bit during the pandemic. One was called the Vermont Housing Improvement Program that has funded 500 units that brought vacant and blighted units back online. So they were vacant units that were rehabbed with $50,000 grants. Never has there been a program that delivered more homes faster at a lower cost than what we accomplished with that. But there still were no really new missing middle home builders. So we went back to our friends at the legislature and said, would you fund a guide to help make this easier for small scale developers? And so we put together a toolkit called the Homes for All Toolkit. It includes a playbook for small scale developers who are thinking about getting involved in investment. It produced designs, missing middle home designs that are very comfortable for even the most conservative Vermonters that might think, oh, I'm not sure if a fourplex could fit in my neighborhood. These designs would fit in the neighborhood. And they were done by a firm out of Boston, UTL, that was fantastic to work with. And then we did test runs with them. We did infill design test runs in 6 pilot communities to see how could these fit within existing villages, downtowns, sewered, unsewered places. And so the next phases of that project that we have funding for are to roll out pre-approved design types that are construction ready, more modeled off of if you've seen Kalamazoo, Michigan, or South Bend, Indiana, that it would be a little bit like that, and a training cohort, a peer-to-peer training network to build the missing marketplace of small-scale developers, because without them, we just can't do it. So, yeah.
Sounds great, and I'll ask a follow-on question on this one as well. If for anyone who went over to Madison and saw the new development over there that was done with the Rural Affordable Rental Housing Program, when I first saw the renderings of that development online, my immediate reaction was, oh, any community in Maine would welcome this. This looks like something that would be in any Maine town. And the experience that Madison has had, as well as many other communities as they have implemented from this program, are really providing an example. And I'm wondering, your experience, Jake, when the 6 pilot communities projects were done as examples, was there a particular strategy that you used to get the message out to others and kind of help those walls come down, those psychological walls that people have about new development?
Yeah, well, I think one of the great innovations of the project is that when we were putting together the designs with UTL, we were looking at historical precedents in those communities that people said, this is a building that I love, this is familiar, this would fit in my neighborhood. And so I think using that where we have photographic examples of an existing building in a community that's then made into a modern triplex and looks like a single family home for many people, it was made it comfortable, right? Made it accessible.
And was there any other communication strategy beyond that you did to get the message out?
Well, we did an open call for interested communities. So, and we had a much broader interest than the 6 communities that we selected, and then when we were going to each community, we notified local media. So we often had the local reporter and the local public access channel covering those meetings. And this project just got some really outstanding press from the Congress for New Urbanism's journal newsletter, as well as Planetizen, which is our main national planning news outlet.
Great. Yeah, people are so visual, right? When they see something, there you go. And again, last but not least, we're going to have Sarah. We've got innovation happening right here in Maine as well. And I said earlier today, the work that that GoPIF is doing and others in the administration in creating this Office of Community Affairs is really important for identifying all of the different functional areas and policy areas around state government that really contribute and can really help to address our housing challenges. So I'm looking forward to Sarah telling us more about how it's all going to work.
Thank you, Representative, and I was so excited for you to give me such a good lead-in this morning on this topic. So I have just a few slides that I want to go through, if you wouldn't mind flipping through for me. The first, I just want to acknowledge sort of the limited capacity that a lot of our communities have. So whether it comes to planning for housing or planning for climate resilience, this map is from Maine Won't Wait, the state's climate action plan. And what you see is the areas in red that have very limited planning capacity. They probably don't have an in-house planner in their town. A lot of towns have a part-time town administrator and a volunteer planning board. In the orange, you get to places that maybe they have a regional planner, access to regional planning services, but as we know, even those can be stretched pretty thin. And then so you get into places that have a little bit more with the yellow and the blue, but the overall picture is of lots of Maine communities that just don't have the planning capacity that they need to be tackling these really significant challenges like climate and housing and land use. Next slide, please. And what we found is that right now communities have to go to multiple state agencies to get support for planning and technical assistance. And so they might go to the Department of Agriculture or they might go to the Department of Marine Resources. The programs exist to support them, but they're sort of scattered across state agencies. And Representative Gere spoke this morning about LD 1934, which directed our office last fall to sort of look at where communities were going to find support for planning and technical assistance and make recommendations to improve that system. And next slide, please. The work that we did really reinforced the idea that the complexity of the issues that communities are facing requires a more coordinated system than the sort of siloed one that state government has right now. Next slide, please. What we heard, we did a bunch of focus groups and interviews with people for that LD 1934 report. What we heard is that communities are really looking for much more of a one-stop shop, someplace where they can go to find sort of information about multiple intersecting issues and find technical assistance and funding to support them to do the work that we all think is so important and that we want them to do. And so the proposal that has come forward, the moment that I was speaking of earlier, is when, as part of the supplemental budget, the governor and the legislature have now created the Maine Office of Community Affairs. And so the idea here is that it is an office that will bring together lots of programs that support community planning and technical assistance that are currently located in different agencies. It's going to bring them together and reorganize them into a single independent office. And so the purpose of the office really is to partner with regional organizations and communities to address these really difficult challenges and to provide coordinated technical support and funding services. Next slide, please. And actually, one other thing I'll just mention on that, just in terms of timing, and this is a little bit complicated to communicate, but just so folks are clear, the supplemental budget created the office and established a director position. That will go into effect when the supplemental budget goes into effect on August 9th. And then over the next year, we'll be working with the agencies to move those programs as part of the biennial budget. So that's the budget that will happen with the legislature next spring. And so the idea is that next July 1, when the next biennial budget goes into place, all of these programs will exist in a single office that will be sort of ready to go and provide those coordinated technical assistance and funding services. communities. I just wanted to acknowledge the significance of the challenges that our communities are facing. These are all photos from the December and January storms last year that really drove home a sense of urgency in terms of the climate impacts that we're facing and the need to really be investing in the resilience of our communities and our infrastructure. So these are Route 26. Sorry, I have to put on my glasses here because I can't read my notes from here, but Route 26 in Newry, the commercial fish pier in Stonington, the Sunday River Access Road, the mill that everyone saw, the spinning mill this morning in Skowhegan, and then downtown Hollowell. So you can see that the significance of these storms was both coastal and inland. So these are really, really significant storm impacts that I think sort of elevated the sense of urgency that everyone is feeling around the need for resilience. And then the next slide, please. Also wanting to highlight the housing demand. As part of the LD 2003 work that Ben spoke about this morning, the state did a housing assessment. And what we found is that we need almost 80,000 housing units across the state, both to accommodate the current need that we have right now and to accommodate the future growth that we need to sustain our economic vitality. So these are really urgent and significant challenges that we're working on at the policy level, but that require partnership with communities at the local level to implement the solutions that we're all searching for. And then the last thing I want to highlight is the federal funding that is available for communities. And many of you are probably aware of a lot of these, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, really significant amounts of funding available for infrastructure investments, which are hugely important. But it comes back to the capacity, and that can be a barrier for a lot of Maine communities as well in terms of being able to access those funds. So a combination of really big challenges, significant opportunities, and all of that kinds of leads us to the opportunity that I think this new office has. And so my last slide is just kind of laying out what this office is going to include. From a climate resilience perspective, it'll include the Climate and Energy Grants Program that I spoke about this morning, the partnership. It'll include the Maine Coastal Program and the Maine Floodplain Program. The Land Use Planning Program, Municipal Planning Technical Assistance, is going to be coming over into this new office. From a housing perspective, the Housing Opportunity Program that Ben spoke about this morning, and code enforcement, and then Volunteer Maine, which is the Commission for Service. And so you have all of these programs that will be sort of leaving their individual agencies and coming together to really make that one-stop shop for communities that I think is really needed and can help really move things forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think from the perspective of a legislator looking in on the process, it was really heartening to see the level of engagement and analysis you did to really come to the conclusions of how to create this office. I'm wondering, thinking about the perspective of a Maine community out here, we do have, George had said New Hampshire is not a strong home rule state. We are a strong home rule state and have quite a bit of very strong devotion at the municipal level to how decisions are made. And I'm just wondering, for folks sitting out there now who may have differing levels of expertise and or staffing in their own municipality, what's the best way for them to engage with the opportunities that you highlighted on from both the federal and the state?
Do you mean specifically the federal funding opportunities or the new office? Yeah, so there's a couple things I'd highlight. One is, when I spoke about the Community Resilience Partnership earlier, I really want to emphasize that we provide grants to communities and grants to service providers. There is an amazing network of service providers, many of whom are in this room, including our regional planning organizations and private consultants and other nonprofits who help communities navigate these issues and can provide that on-the-ground capacity as well. And then especially for accessing those federal funding opportunities, which are very complex, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for some of this infrastructure funding, and we really want to make sure that Maine is putting its best foot forward and accessing as many of those funds as we can. And then for the larger office, I mean, right now, these programs all exist. They're providing technical assistance and support and grants to communities every day. You're probably familiar with many of them. What we're hoping this new office will do is make it easier for communities, especially smaller communities, to access them with one phone call, right? And so you call about this thing and this challenge that you're facing, which is intersecting with these other challenges you're facing. And so how can we, as a collection of state agencies, sort of put our best foot forward to deliver you the support that you need?
Great, thanks. I think your presentation really struck me with the thought that necessity is the mother of invention, right? When it's very sad that so many communities in Maine have endured what we've had to endure, especially in December and January as well. But it also is the spur to change. And I know recently in my town, we had folks come out to a climate discussion who were really there for the first time because they were really, really concerned based on what they had seen in the storms. And so that, again, unfortunate that it takes that kind of an event to cause people to start to think a little differently. But I guess I would just say in terms of the timing of things, are there things, I know you guys have been traveling around a bit, do you have some thoughts on how best to make sure that we're taking advantage of the moment, if you will?
Yeah. I think for towns, I think the best thing right now is to be thinking about what your needs are. What are your needs around climate resilience? What are the areas that were hit by the storms? We heard from the town manager in Stonington, they've been preparing for sea level rise and big storm events. They were still surprised by the scale and realized that they need to be doing more. So I think from a community perspective, starting to prioritize what your vulnerabilities are, who is vulnerable in your community, and then we have found that sort of having plans and being ready with projects, that is what sets you up for success with some of this federal funding. And again, a plug for the partnership is those kinds of smaller state grants can really help you get ready for being ready to go after some of the larger federal grants.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts on that topic of, kind of meeting the moment? Are there things from Vermont or New Hampshire, thoughts that you all might have on that topic? No.
Just one, I'm very, very impressed by Maine's approach to this because Vermont's experiencing the same problem too. We have 650,000 people approximately. We have 251 municipalities. Those municipalities, the median municipal size is around 2,000 of a population. So you can imagine what the scale of local government is. We have great coverage with our regional planning commissions, but it's not the same as having an embedded project manager in a community or a coordinated state agency that you can go to. So I think this is a very exciting model that we should talk.
A lot of those good conversations happening. At this point, I will open it up for questions. I think we've got such a great opportunity to learn from Maine and beyond. So anybody have any questions for our panel? Yes, right there.
I had a question about, is this on? Yeah. New Hampshire Zoning Appeals Court, the statewide court you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And would this be a case where a project is working its through lower boards in a municipality, the zoning board, the planning board, and then perhaps it gets to the council and those decisions get reversed and the projects get stopped? Is that a type of case that could be brought to that state court and then?
Yeah, in short, it is. I mean, if a developer feels they've a decision has been made erroneously, then they have standing to appeal that. And so just like it's been going on for a long time, when we used to go to the Superior Court, now there's just another way to do it, but it's for same things, residentially oriented, and again, this could also include a mix of commercial and residential as well, so it's not just if it's solely a residential development that it can go to the Housing Appeals Board. But yeah, it would be anytime when someone feels like there's a decision that doesn't seem right, they can appeal it, and the Housing Appeals Board is an expedited process.
Thank you.
And George, just a follow on from that. I know that we have situations sometimes in Maine where in a municipality there might be a comprehensive plan that states or a zoning plan that states where certain types of development is allowed, but then the ordinances that are in place don't necessarily comport with that. How does the appeals board handle a situation like that?
So I haven't studied it that closely, but going back to an original question is that you can't really enter in other information into the decisioning. It's sort of what's the decision based on? Is that decision, does it stand up to its own merits of the decision? So while that's an important piece, I think a developer will use that, and as long as they're entering that information into the record, then that can be looked at, but it's mostly about process and legality.
I have a
Great.
follow-up question on that.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Where?
Right over here.
Oh, right over here, okay.
Many of the appeals processes in Maine are instituted by abutters who disapprove of a project. In New Hampshire, are they compelled to go to the housing board, or can they go to the state standard court process and just kill a project by delay?
Yeah, they can't do that at the Housing Appeals Board level. That's really an appeal against a decision made at the local level. So they've already put their case into the record in terms of being an abutter and what those issues are. And then the question is, was that and other information taken in the right way in order to look at, the five criteria that either makes that appeal justified or not?
So if a project is approved, can an abutter who objects doesn't like the project then appeal that in New Hampshire?
Yeah, yes, indeed they could, yes. An abutter has standing, so they can appeal that, correct.
And would they go to that?
Within 30
board?
days, Ivy said.
Yeah. Would they go to that same board that the developer would? Or can they just go to
Sure,
court?
yes, they can.
Thank you.
Are you a New Hampshire resident? What town? No, just kidding.
Great. Other questions? Yes, right back here.
I don't have a question per se, but I just want to give a big shout out to Vermont, the work that you have been doing with housing, your housing toolkit. This morning on our drive up here, I actually talked about the zoning guide for great neighborhoods because it's an amazing document and it's so useful. And also to the New Hampshire, and I've been following what you guys have been doing. You're putting up such excellent material and we all should be checking it out. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We do need Maine examples, so maybe just complement it, but thank you for putting those resources together. They are amazing. And I talked about both of them today. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I think, a great lesson from today, and I think for all of us who are working on these issues, I'm big on not reinventing the wheel. When we have so many great examples from other states and from within Maine, just trying to get those best practices out and socialized and used by everyone is such a great opportunity, and keeps as we're all concerned about cost and making sure that towns can afford to do the kind of development that they want. It's really, really a great opportunity. So. Absolutely. Other questions? There was one over here. Right, who had a question right here? Someone? Oh, yes. And this is Ivy from...
Ivy Van from Peterborough, New Hampshire. I think one of the things that that you asked George about the question between, your master plan says this, your comp plan says this, and your zoning says, well, actually, no. As far as I'm aware, and George may know better, there's no legal recourse there. All you can do is shame them. So I think that for those of us who are working to improve the ability to create housing choice and housing accessibility and better design patterns, bring that up. Your master plan says you want this, and you're preventing it. I wish there were a legal recourse. George, I don't think there is there? That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think earlier when we were talking about LD 1976, the update of the growth management law, one of the key things one of the key goals that I think we have in that is helping communities make that document a clear and strong and intentional document so that when it is looked at from a legal perspective, it supports and is clear about what the plan is, what is allowed where, and then what are the ordinances and the actual implementation that enable that to happen, and making sure that that is all one piece so that then when you're in a legal situation, it's going to help. And I know that I've heard some stories today about where the code changes and the zoning changes were made as part of that comprehensive planning process, as opposed to an afterthought after the fact. That, to me, that made me very happy because it really does make the process actually action-oriented, where you can actually take action on the plan that you just worked for many, many months on as a community. And I would just, George, looks like you might have something else to add there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what's the common theme here is just trying to work with our communities and provide technical assistance to do that work. I talk about community engagement because, uncovering barriers to housing production is irrelevant if the community is not aware and behind the issues. And that's really not sort of like your noticed meetings. It's about getting out into the community. It's not outreach, but engagement and doing that work way ahead of time so that, and we talked about what things look like. I mean, picture paints 1,000 words, and I think that that's so important because there's a natural fear of change. Housing, we all know we want it, but we're scared about having multiple ADUs or a quadplex next to ourselves. God knows Ivy knows what the legislature thinks about that, but if you look at the visual parts, at least in New Hampshire, the good thing of being the third largest legislature in the English-speaking world with 424 members is that you can really get to representative government, and if you can convince half of them and engage with them, it's really good, but that's also important at the local level. What are people's issues about housing, making it real, making it relatable, and then when you talk about an ADU or a cluster ordinance or something else, it makes sense. There you go.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I often tell the story. The reason I ran for the legislature was someone who is now a constituent came to me and said, I have 3 acres of land, my house is on 3 acres of land, I have 2 adult daughters who can't find a place to live in Maine, and I want to build, she didn't call it an ADU, but she wanted to build an ADU on her land, and she couldn't do it. And we passed LD 2003, and that is now allowed anywhere in the state that a single family home is allowed. So it is, those kinds of things really are transformational and empower regular people to help solve the housing crisis and help do the things that their families and their communities need. So it's great progress on that one. Other questions, comments, inspiration? Yes, back there.
I'm Ed Libby, I'm from Yarmouth. Going back to Ivy's question, it's been a years-long frustration of mine. I actually believe there is legislation in Maine, I've read it, statutory that, and the way it's worded, I could give you the number, but not off the top of my head, that if the zoning doesn't come into alignment with your comprehensive plan within 24 months, then the zoning is voidable. The problem is, if you want to take that up with the town, you're suing the town. So it's a difficult thing. Really what needs to happen is these towns shouldn't get their comp plans renewed if they're not in compliance with their last one. And we tried that, and shout out to Traci too. I mean, amazing work on the Housing Committee at Augusta and also with the policy action. So we'll just keep trying. But there is some statutory language if somebody wants to take on their town.
Yeah, and I think we are continuing to look for ways to, number one, help communities improve that alignment so that things do align and so your intentions are actually carried out in your zoning and your ordinances. And then also other things that we can do to really get that process out into the community. I think that is such a great opportunity. The more people that get engaged in this conversation, the more people have those aha moments of, wait a minute, this doesn't make much sense. We need to do this differently. And the more people come on board with the solutions. So that's great. Any other questions or comments? And I'm trying to look around. Are we? 4. It's 4. Okay. Anybody coming up from Grow Smart to wrap it up? Well, at this point, I will say a huge thank you to our panelists today. Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone for being here and for asking great questions. And we'll see you soon.